Okay, so last time, just to put it all together, what we have so far, we started off with Rava's Chakira. Rava's Chakira was that according to the Chum in the case of Tzroros, where it's Tzroros as a result of normal behavior, we said that according to the Chum, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek. The question is, when the Chum says you pay Chatzi Nezek, are you going to pay Megufo or are you going to pay Melia? Do you say that on the one hand, it's a case of Orche, if it's a case of Orche, of normal behavior, then like any other case of Orche, when it comes to from what you pay, you're going to pay Me'aliyah? Or do you say that no, you're paying Chatzi Nezek? If you're paying Chatzi Nezek, then that mimics the dinim of Tam. If it mimics the dinim of Tam, then maybe when it comes to from what you pay, you should pay Megufo. So we attempted to address the question based on the Brisa. We rejected that Raya, that way, the Brisa. Then we attempted to bring it, the Mishnah Daf Chafal from base, of case of Kel Shnat Harara. We assumed that the case is a case of Tzroros, in which case the Chum tell us in the case of Tzroros, you're paying Chatzi Nezek Megufo. And so if that's the case, you could address Rava's question. We said, but that's no good because of Rav Elazar's opinion, because Rav Elazar says you pay Nezek Shalem Megufo, and if it's a case of Tzroros, that doesn't make any sense. Why not? Because if he's saying Nezek Shalom in the case of Tzroros, he's siding with Sumchis. If he's siding with Sumchis, then how could it be that you say that you pay Megufo? So the Gemara said at first, you know what, you're right. Really, the case of Kel Shnat Chorah is a case of Karen. In other words, it's abnormal behavior. It's where the dog picks up the coal in its mouth, and when the coal is in its mouth, it drops it. And now, if that's the case, it's abnormal behavior. It's abnormal behavior. It's no longer a case of Tzroros, so we can't really answer Rava's question anymore. But we can understand the Chum say Chatzi Nezek Megufo. That makes a lot of sense. It's a case of Karen. Wait a second, but what about Rav Elazar's opinion? How is it that he can say that you pay Nezek Shalom Megufo? The answer was because he holds like Reb Tarfon. Reb Tarfon tells us that in the case of Karen B'Shus and Nizik, you're going to have to pay Nezek Shalom. So there's precedent for that. But the Gemara said, but wait a second, but if you do that, then you can't address Rava's question anymore. So in order to salvage the case, to be a case of Tzroros, we have to figure out how can Rav Elazar say that you pay Nezek Shalom Megufo. So the Gemara said, I'll tell you why he holds you pay Nezek Shalom Megufo, because of Rav Yehuda's point. Because Rav Yehuda, we know the way the Rav Ada bar Av explained Rav Yehuda's din is that he said Rav Yehuda holds that in the case where you did shmir b'chus, you did minimal shmir on your ox, you locked the gate, the ox somehow gets out, so now and it does damage. So Rav Yehuda said, well, how much you're going to have to pay? It's going to depend if it's a tam or a muad. If it's a tam, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek. If it's a muad, you're going to pay nothing. You're putter. But Rav Ada bar Av says, wait a second, but that can't be. That doesn't make any sense. How could it be the first time it gores, when it gets out, you're going to pay? It does it the second time, you're going to pay. But if it does it a bunch of times, now it's a muad, you're off the hook entirely. That can't be. So therefore, Rav Ada bar Av said, must be the concept of tzad tamas from kol memenes. You're always going to have to pay for the tam aspect of damages. In other words, Chatzi Nezek's worth of damage, you're definitely going to have to pay. The question is just beyond that, how much you're going to have to pay. So Rav Yehuda tells us that as long as you did a shmir pechusa, you're going to be exempt to pay more than anything more than Chatzi Nezek. Now, but wait a second. If you're saying that you're going to pay for the tam aspect of this damage, that means you're going to have to pay Chatzi Nezek, and you're also going to pay Megufo. So what do you see? So now we can complain Rav Elazar. Rav Elazar said that you pay Nezek Shalom because he holds like Sumchis. And he's also going to say that you pay Megufo. Why are you paying Megufo? Because Chatzi Nezek's worth of damage is going to have to be paid Megufo because of the concept of Tzad Tamos B'mkom Omeres. But now the Gemara has a big problem with saying that. The Gemara says, wait a second. How can you say, remember, if the case is a case of Tzroros, remember, we're talking about the case of the dog right now. We're talking about the case of Kelev, Shnat Harara. And we're going to assume right now that in order to address Rava's question, this case has to be a case of Tzroros, and it's Tzroros of Orche, where it's normal behavior for the animal. And the case that we've been talking up until now, right, Rava's whole question was, let's say the animal's walking along, and as a result of its walking, a stone gets flicked out and goes and crashes a glass vase. So as a result of Tzroros of Orche, of normal behavior, you're going to have to pay. We know that according to Chum, you pay Chatzi Nezek. Now the question is, do you pay Meguf or Me'aliyah? But wait a second, though. If the case of the Kel Shnat Harara is a case of Tzroros of Orche, then how does Rav Yehuda's concept make any sense? Remember, Rav Yehuda's concept, or Rav Ada bar Ava's explanation of Rav Yehuda's concept of Tzad Tamas, is predicated on the fact that how could it be that an animal starts off as a tam and then turns into a muad? Right? And that when it was a tam, you're chayav to pay, and now that it's muad, you have to pay nothing. It can't be. So it must be that once it turns into a muad, you're still going to have to pay Chatzi Nezek's worth of damage. But wait a second, that only makes sense if it started off as a tam and turned into a muad. But here, we're not talking about that case. We're talking about a case of Tzroros of Orche where it was always this way. It's normal behavior. then how could it be that you could tell me that you're going to pay Chati Nezek's worth of damage, Meikufo, because of Tzad Tamas B'Kol Medicine? It didn't start off as a tam and turn into a muad. It was always this way. So the Gemara says, in order to salvage this point, to justify Rav Elazar's opinion, to say Nezek Shal Meikufo, we're going to have to come up with a way for Tzroros, for the case of Tzroros, for the case of Kel Shanat Acharot, to be a case of Tzroros, where it starts off as a tam with respect to Tzroros and turns into a muad with respect to Tzroros. Only then will I then be able to justify Rav Elazar's opinion to say that you're going to pay Megufo in this case because of the concept of Tzad Tamas. So the question is, how do we pull that off? How do we pull off saying that the case of Kel Shanat Acharot is a case of Tzroros of Orche, and that in this case of Tzroros of Orche, the Chacham are going to tell us that you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek, and they're going to say you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek Megufo, but Rav Elazar, more importantly, is going to say that you're going to pay Nezek Shalem, and that Nezek Shalem is going to be Megufo. But if he's paying Megufo, I'm going to justify that based on Rav Yehuda, of Rav Yehuda's concept of Tzad Tamas. This means that in the case of Tzroros, the case of Tzroros is going to have to first start off as a tam, and then turn into a muad. Is that possible? Is that possible for Tzroros to start off as tam with respect to Tzroros and then turn into muad with respect to Tzroros? So it could be then that, yeah, it is possible. And that could be that that's exactly the machlokas between the Chum and Rav Elazar. It could be that the machlokas between the Chum and Rav Elazar is exactly this point. Do you say, and this is the key words of the Gemara, do you say, yesh ha'da? Do you say, yesh ha'da l'tzroros? That there's such a thing as becoming a muad with respect to Tzroros. That an animal can start off as a tam with respect to Tzroros and turn into a muad with respect to Tzroros. So we would say, could be that according to Rav Elazar, yeah, because he says Nezek Shalim, and according to the Chum, the answer is no, because they say Chatz Nezek. But wait a second. What does it mean for an animal to start off as tam with respect to Tzroros and turn into muad with respect to Tzroros? So this is where you have the two Lashonos of Rashi. We'll start with the first one, that's a more intuitive one, the one that Rashi prefers. And Rashi gives us two explanations of how it's possible for there to be hada with respect to Tzroros. How do we explain this machlokas between Rav Elazar and the Chachamim? So Rashi tells us, and this is the Rashi on Yud Chesam Beis, the long one, Rashi's first Lashon, so we'll call this Rashi number 1. Rashi tells us, I'll tell you it's as follows. It's because, let's say, remember the case of Tzroros you've been assuming until now is that it was, let's say, walking along and a stone gets flicked out, which means that it's a function of regel. Regel is mun mentchila, so it's an innate characteristic which doesn't start off as a tam. But it's possible that, let's say, the dog picks up the coal, puts it in its mouth, and does this for the first time. Well, the first time that it does it, and then it drops it, that's a case of Tzroros as a result of atypical behavior. Well, let's say the dog does it a bunch more times. It starts off as abnormal behavior, now it does it a bunch more times. Now what do you call that? Do you call that a case of Tzroros of Orche because, well, now that's normal behavior for the dog, or not? So the Chachamim tell us that, well, no, you pay Chatzi Nezek, and you're going to pay the Chatzi Nezek Mikufa. Why? Presumably the Chachamim say that because they have the following lumdus. Their lumdus is presumably that, how could it be that if an animal, if we're dealing with Tzroros of Orche, where it's muad metchilaso, right? Well, let's say it's a stone that gets flicked out as a result of walking. What's the halach in that case? How much would you pay when it's Tzroros as a result of normal behavior, when the stone gets flicked out as a result of its walking? How much would you pay? Chatzi Nezek. And it's Chatzi Nezek Megufo. So how could it be that if it starts off as a tam and turns into a muad, that it's going to be worse than if it started off as a muad? So therefore the Chachamim say Chatzi Nezek Megufo. That's how we understand. So in other words, because the Chachamim say Chatzi Nezek Megufo over here, in the case of Tzroros, where it starts off as a tam and turns into muad, I can infer what they hold in the case of Tzroros, where it starts off as orche, starts off as where it's muad metchila, so when it's a stone that gets flicked out as a result of its walking. However, that's the Chacham's opinion, but Rav Elazar disagrees. Rav Elazar, hang on a second there. Rav Elazar would tell you that in this case, you're going to pay nezek shalim. Why is he saying you pay nezek shalim? Well, he's going to say nezek shalim because, wait a second, this dog was doing something abnormal. If the dog is doing something that's abnormal, that's not normal tzroros. Normal tzroros, right? Tzroros of orche that the Chum we're talking about, when it's mur metchilaso, what is that? That's a function of, hang on a second, sorry about that. That's a function of regel. That's told of the regel. That's how we started off the whole conversation here. Remember? When we first introduced the concept of Tzroros, we said, oh, it's regel, and Tzroros get flicked out as a result of regel. But that would make sense if it's regel, then I can make that argument. But here, we're talking about where the dog is doing something that's abnormal. If it's doing something that's abnormal, that's no longer a told of the regel. What do you call that? I would call that told of the Karen. Well, wait a second, but if that's told of the Karen, that means it's a result of abnormal behavior. Well, Karen can turn into a muad. That's fair game. So therefore, when I'm now talking about Tzroros, in this case, where it's a case of, let's call it bidashani, where it's doing atypical stuff then turns into a muad, so then, in that case, it is possible to turn into muad, because it started off as Karen, now it turns into a muad with respect to Karen, and so therefore, now it's possible to say that in this case of Tzroros of Orche, when it turns into Orche, I'm going to say that you're going to pay nezek shalim. That's fair game. Now, wait a second. But if it started off as a told of the Karen, then that means that what are we dealing with? That means we're dealing with a tam that turns into a muad. Well, now that's perfect. If we start off with the case where it started off as a tam with respect to Tzroros, and then turned into a muad with respect to Tzroros, what can I invoke now? I can invoke Rav Yuda's principle based on Rav Ada bar Ava's explanation of tzad tamas. Of tzad tamas b'mkoma omedes. Now, if I'm invoking this concept of tzad tamas b'mkoma omedes, that is going to be with respect to, number one, we're going to say chatzi nezek's worth of damage is going to be paid, and that chatzi nezek that's being paid is going to be megufo. So now it's true. According to Rav Elazar, you're going to pay nezek shalim in this case. But it's also justifiable how he says that you're going to pay megufo. Why? Because it started off as a tam with respect to Tzroros and then turned into a mur with respect to Tzroros. And if that's the case, this concept of tzad tamas b'mkom omedes applies. And if it applies, then half damage's worth of that nezek shalim is going to be megufo, and the other half is just going to be not megufo. Okay, so just to put this together, again, just to give the overview of what we did here, what we said is, we're trying to figure out how could it be that in the case of Kal Shanat Charara, if we want to salvage it, we want it to be a case of Tzroros of Orche, but if it's a case of Tzroros of Orche, we're going to have to figure out how could Rav Elazar hold that you pay Nezek Shalim Megufo. And so, in order to say that, we invoked Rav Yuda's principle, based on Rav Ada bar Ava, of Tzad Tamas B'mkom Omedes. But in order to say that, you're going to have to say that you can start off as a Tam with respect to Tzroros and turn into Mura with respect to Tzroros. So in order to say that, we're going to say, yeah, that's exactly the machlokas between the Chum and Rav Elazar over here. The Chum are going to say, you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek Migufo. Why do they say, now, we've said there's two explanations in Rashi of how to understand the case of becoming a mura with respect to Tzroros. The first explanation of Rashi is that when the Chum say Chatzi Nezek Migufo, that's because they say, how could it be that it starts off as a tam, because the dog does something abnormal, it does it a bunch of times, now becomes a muad. Wait a second, but if it would start off as a muad, you'd have to pay Chatzi Nezek Migufo. So now that it turns into what it started off as a tam, it can't be any worse. So I can infer what the Chum would say in a general case, for Rava's case, for the Chum over there, that they'll say, oh, you'll pay Chatzi Nezek Migufa. But what according to Rav Elazar? Rav Elazar is going to say that you pay Nezek Shalem, and he's going to say you pay Migufa. Why? Because if it starts off doing abnormal things, then that means we're starting off with Karen. If we're starting off with Karen, well, Karen can turn into a muad. If Karen can turn into a muad, now it's a muad with respect to Tzroros. If it's a muad with respect to Tzroros, then I'm going to say that that's why you're going to pay Chatzi Nezek Megufa. Now, wait a second. Just note, though, if you're saying this way in Rashi, according to Rashi's Mahalach, then, the Chacham's opinion is Chatzi Nezek Megufa, and Rav Elazar's opinion is Nezek Shal Megufa. But wait a second. How does this relate to Machlokas between Sumchis and the Chachamim? How's it going to relate? Remember, according to the Chachamim, when we're talking about the standard case of Tzroros that we talked about originally.